We have a decision to make, whether we want to be a property-owning democracy or a landed aristocracy. Now, that might seem stark, and it is, but it is also true. 100% true if you look at the facts. According to the CMHC, for a house to be affordable, it should not consume more than 30% of a family's income. Currently, in Canada, the average house would consume 50% of the average family's household income. In other words, the average house is 2/3 more expensive than the average family can presently afford. And that's just the average. Across Canada, there are more extreme examples. For example, in Toronto, it takes 68% of the average family's income to own the average house. In Vancouver, it's 79%. And that is 79% of pre-tax income, which means that it is mathematically impossible, not just difficult, for the average Vancouverite to own the average home. Why? Of course, because you don't have 79% of your pre-tax income left when the government is done with you. Even if you spent 100% of your post-tax income, it would not be enough. Even if you ate no food, bought no clothes, had zero recreation, you would not have enough money as an average Vancouverite to own the average home. Now, what's causing it? Why is it that Vancouver is the second most expensive housing market in the world when you compare average income to average house price, and Toronto is number 5? Both of them are ahead of Manhattan, ahead of London, England, ahead of San Francisco, places with more people, more money, and much less land. What is causing it? Is it because we don't have enough land in Canada? Seriously? We are the 10th least populated population density country in the world. There are more places where there's nobody than there are places where there's anybody in Canada. If you spread our population out equally across the land, there would be only one person standing on every 3 CFL-size football fields. That's how much land we have in this country. And yet, somehow we have a housing shortage. Well, clearly, it's not a lack of land. So could it be that there's a booming economy that's driving up housing prices? Well, of course not. The GDP went down $120 billion last year and has not recovered. So what else is it? Is it COVID? Well, COVID should have reduced housing prices. When CMHC testified at Finance Committee at the beginning of COVID, they said that the pandemic would reduce housing prices by 14%. The Bank of Canada said it would be a disinflationary event. And it should have been. People were moving further out into the country where per square foot costs are actually lower. Furthermore, their jobs were threatened, so they would be less inclined to get approved for a mortgage, and their earned wages were down, which means that they would have less money with which to pay it. It should have driven down housing prices. Instead, housing prices went up. They started going down in April 2020 before rocketing up 40% since that time. So what is the real cause? Well, the answer is that government is restricting supply and ballooning demand. Let's start with supply. Here in Canada, we have one of the slowest processes on planet Earth to get from buying a land to building on it. In some jurisdictions, it takes 7 years. Canada, in general, is a place where it takes forever to get anything approved. In fact, out of 37 OECD nations, we're ranked number 36 for the time it takes to get a building permit for a warehouse. Not much different for housing. Toronto's per unit of housing cost of government is 50% higher than the average in the United States municipalities. Just the charges alone consume almost $250,000 in costs for every new unit housing built in Toronto. And if you take the global cost of government for a new unit of housing in Vancouver, it's $600,000 just to pay the cost of government. Now, this, of course, keeps aristocratic, leafy neighborhoods gentrified and keeps other people out, makes the rich richer because they get to have an exclusive domain over these neighborhoods where no one else can build and get in, which is very good if you already have a house. It increases your wealth. But for those people who are not yet in, well, they're shut out. It's like there is a wall built around these neighborhoods, and only the rich are allowed inside the wall, and everyone else has to try paying the gatekeeper to get in, but of course most can't afford to do so. And so the governments restrict supply. What do they do with demand? Well, they have pumped $356 billion of brand new created currency into the financial system. The Bank of Canada began printing money in March of 2020. And from February of that year to February of this year, the money supply grew by $354 billion. What was the size of the federal deficit? $354 billion, exactly the same number. So the printed money was to pay the government's overspending. Well, what did that do to inflation? Well, as we know, inflation is everywhere and always a monetary phenomenon. As the supply of money goes up, the prices rise with it. And it started with housing prices. In fact, from Q1 2020 to Q1 2021, the money that went into the financial system and into the mortgage system increased new mortgage borrowing by 41%. You know what the price increase was for housing between April of last year and April of this year? 42%. So the newly created money jacked up mortgage borrowing by 41% and housing prices by 42%. Coincidence? Of course not. These are the simple laws of supply and demand, and they're working very well for the very rich. If you own a $10 million mansion, the increase in your home value, depending on what month to month you choose, is somewhere between $3 and $4 million. That's money you get for doing absolutely nothing. If you are a working class person with the dream of buying a home, that dream just got more and more remote and more unlikely. And furthermore, your landlord's about to raise your rent because the cost of property has risen, which he or she will use, and perhaps in some cases unavoidably so, to raise rent on the people who live there. So the wages of working class people, measured in the amount of real estate you can buy, are down in value by 30 to 40% in just 1 year. Meanwhile, the wealth of the super rich is way up. So what money printing does is it raises the price of the things that the poor must buy and that the rich already own. It is a colossal wealth transfer from the working wage earner to the wealthy asset owner. And so what do? Well, sometimes the answers are actually simple. Not easy, but simple. Open up the country to construction so we build more homes, increase supply. Stop printing money in order to avoid pumping helium into the prices. In other words, start building and stop printing. It is more about what government should stop doing than what they should start doing. They should allow people to keep the value of their dollar, to buy things that are of worth with that dollar, and to build things that will make their lives better. That is how we restore our property-owning democracy. It is how we go back from today's aristocracy to what Canada should be, which is a meritocracy. Thank you.